Jeff will be making sense of how we got to this point, and are there any alternatives as to how the government can raise revenue apart from this fuel tax? But we have Elizabeth Nkuku, who's the Chief Investment Officer from Site and Investments. We'll be talking to her a bit later. But before we get to that, we need to put some things into context.
Perspective, absolutely. Let's give you a breakdown of what actually goes into the petrol, diesel and kerosene prices according to the Energy Regulatory Commission. By the way, we'll focus on Nairobi for now. So, first is what is known as the landed cost. It is the total price of a product or shipment once it has arrived at a buyer's doorstep. In this case, it is the fee we pay when fuel lands at the Mombasa port. For super petrol, that's 57.82 shillings per litre. For diesel, 56.66 shillings per litre. Kerosene, 57.42 shillings per litre. Next is what they call the storage and distribution. That includes the pipeline and road transport between Mombasa and Nairobi, pipeline and depot losses, as well as delivery costs to petrol stations within 40 kilometers of Nairobi. For super petrol, that stands at 3 shillings 90 cents per litre, diesel 3 shillings 66 cents per litre, kerosene 3 shillings 17 cents per litre. Let's keep going. Oil marketing companies' margins also come into play, and these include importers' margins, which is the wholesale cost, and the dealer's margin, which is retail. We're looking at 10 shillings 89 cents per litre for all super, diesel and kerosene, all fuel products. Next up, the final aspect that gets us to the retail price you'll be parting with, at least in Nairobi, is the taxes and levies. There are 8 different taxes and levies that include the newly added VAT, excise duty, merchant shipping levy, import declaration fee, road maintenance levy, petroleum development levy, petroleum regulation levy, and the railway development levy. These cost items alone account for almost half of the final retail price. Now, for super, that's 55 shillings and 19 cents per litre. For diesel, 43 shillings 87 cents per litre. Kerosene, 25 shillings 93 cents per litre. So, with all that, those are cost items combined for Nairobi motorists. Every time you go to the fuel pump, you will pay 127 shillings 80 cents per litre for super, 115 shillings and 8 cents per litre for diesel, 97 shillings 41 cents per litre for kerosene. That is the breakdown, at least in Nairobi for now. Vicky, Elizabeth, take it away.
Thank you, Jeff, for those numbers. And of course, Kenyans are wondering, Elizabeth, what does this mean for our pockets? How did we get here in the first place? Which means, where did that VAT fuel suggestion come from?
Okay. Thank you for having me on studio. When you think about it, historically, we have not been able to finance our budget. So most of the time, KRA has always been behind target in terms of revenue collection. So it has been year in, year out discussions on how then do we make it possible for us to finance our budget. So I think what KRA has actually gone ahead and done is look at ways in which they can be able to bridge the budget deficit. So we have seen steady steps whereby we, as I think last year is the first time they actually met their target over a long period of time. So I think some of the things I've done have actually borne fruits. But I think if you look at where the VAT for fuel came in, it started in 2013, whereby we were supposed to get the taxation was supposed to come in, and it was passed, but it was delayed by 3 years, then further delayed by 2 years. But now I think there's a technicality hitch whereby the parliament is saying don't increase taxes. But at the same time, the executive has a leeway to increase taxes because it's not ascertained to as low. So I think it's just a technicality issue whereby if Parliament comes back and passes it on and the President actually signs to it, then we could see it coming back. But when you think about it, it's going to be a pinch for everyone.
I mean, and there were some reports that the suggestion could have also come from the IMF when they gave us a standby credit facility, saying that in order for you to tap into this, you'll need to put VAT on fuel. I think what IMF said is you have to be physically disciplined. So when you think about your budget deficit, it cannot be more than a certain percentage. So what can you do to reduce to make sure that at least your revenues are actually able to tap into it? So I think this was one of the easy target. You already have it in law. It's just an issue of you've taken it over time. Right. So it was an easy way to
actually break the deficit. So I think for IMF, they're actually saying, can you be able to sustain your economy? And just looking at how do you reduce your physical deficit, really.
So we know the government is planning to raise at least 71 billion shillings from this tax each year. The question is, are there any other ways? Are there alternatives that they could use to raise revenue other than putting the 16% on fuel?
I would take a completely different stand and say you don't have to. Yes, you can actually increase your revenue through maybe increasing the revenue band. However, if you look at in 2015, in 2005, 2006, I think there's a lot of privatization happening then. And that used to come a long way in helping the budgets. For a long time, we have not seen anything of that coming into effect. Main question is, how are we not having a lot of privatization in the public sector, or just companies coming to really, or government coming to sell some of the corporations that they hold. So I think the key issue for me is how do we change our institutions so that we can be able to sell them and be able to raise funds from there. Then after selling, then how do we make them profitable? Because that way then you're creating employment, and at the same time there's a ripple effect to it. Right. So I feel like the solution is not largely in revenue collection per se, it's also in changing the institutions and how they operate.
Now, we know that we've crossed the debt burden by 5 trillion shillings now already. It seems year on year we keep crossing that mark. How do we deal with the debt appetite here in Kenya? Because, of course, a lot of people know that we're doing it because we have development projects that are waiting to be done. But how do we manage this? Because people are wondering, will it sink us in debt in the years to come?
Yes. On the debt levels, being over 55% of GDP, it's pretty huge compared to where we've come from. I was just looking at the numbers. I think we have more than doubled from between 2013 and now. We have actually doubled our debt. It's a big concern in terms of how are we going to service this debt going forward. Yeah. So, and I think those are the conditionalities that IMF is looking at and making sure that they don't want us to get into a deep hole. How then do we get into almost get them to break it up before we actually really sink further into that? Are there ways in which is the appetite is there anything we can do about it? I think yes and no. I don't see how we can really just stop the infrastructure projects that are there. Right. But if you look at the infrastructure developments that we have taken we have been overtaking over time, it takes time as well to materialize or us even getting revenue from it. So it's a lag effect. However, it's an issue of how much burden can we be able to carry in the meantime as we wait for them to turn around. I think like the Thika Superhighway, right now we are benefiting. However, if you look at it, took time for it to be developed. But if we continue investing as much as this, we might not be able to pay it up. And also the fact that if you look at domestically, we have actually crowded up the private sector in a way. We're not having a lot of private sector getting credit because the government is a better bet. So I think those are the things that we need to work on. How do we make sure that the government actually reduces the debt appetite so that the private sector can get credit? Yeah. And once they get credit, then we are able to even to collect more revenues. Let's
head back to the issue of this VAT fuel tax, of course, because we know the MPs had tried to defer it by 2 years, but still Treasury decided to implement it. How do we get reprieve? What are the options for Parliament in terms of having probably the President assent to it or even amending the VAT Act? What are their options to ensure that at least Kenyans get some sort of reprieve in this time?
I think it's where the three arms of governments come into place, whereby you have the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary coming in. When I was speaking to one of my lawyer colleagues, she was just telling me as it is right now, it's a technicality hitch, whereby if the president comes in and says, now fine, I'm going to assent to what the parliament said, then we will see a reprieve whereby there will be a turnaround. However, if the president comes in and assents it to law, then we are okay. If he assents it to law, then we are okay. If he comes and proceeds the way it is right now, then we have a problem. And I feel like if he doesn't assent it to law, then we have a problem, because it could be a lot of social issues. It's one of those things that really touches a lot of us, because me and you will have to pay more for fuel, and then the ripple effect of it, the cost of living really just goes up. Yeah.
All right, Elizabeth, so we'll see what that means in terms of whether the signature of the president will be appended on that document to see reprieve for Kenyans or not. We'll probably have to fork off a lot more money. And the question, of course, is how will the new fuel taxes affect you in your pocket? Jeff, that is our question.
Absolutely. Good discussion there, by the way. Yeah, the question Victoria is posing, how will the new fuel prices affect you? Tweets, Facebook, posts.